Thanks very much. First of all, thank you to Veronica and Lorraine for inviting me and letting me indulge in talking about my favorite topic, and in particular about this new book, which this talk is based on. And thank you also to the various colleagues and friends that I recognize in the audience. I really appreciate that you made time for this. And I'm going to try and talk for maybe about 45 minutes or so. So I may have to rush a little bit between slides, but since it's being recorded, I think it'll be possible for anyone who missed anything to check it later. And of course, you're very welcome to get in touch with me for any further information, because it's really hard for me to talk about this in just 45 minutes. So here are some of the books that Veronica kindly mentioned in her introduction. So again, anyone interested, please look these up and have a look through the various themes. But today what I'm doing is talking about this particular book, Engaging Children in Applied Linguistics Research. And what I tried to do is just talk you through how this book came about, why I decided to do it, and also give you a little taster of the kind of actual classroom research projects that people might want to do with their own learners, or indeed encourage teachers they work with to do with their own learners. So first of all, I just want to start with my own inspirations for this book. Of course, it has been in the making for quite a few years, and the beginnings of my inspirations, I guess, come from many places, but I don't know how many of you recognize this gentleman. If I had time, I would ask you to, type something in the chat box, but since I can't see the chat box, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, those of you who don't recognize him, this is David Little from Trinity College in Ireland, and he's one of the leading figures on writing about language learning autonomy. And quite early in my career, I was very much taken with the idea of giving learners choices and encouraging autonomy and autonomous classrooms. And I saw this work in actual practice. So, for example, in Leni Dam's classrooms in Denmark, these have been widely publicized and written about and talked about in conferences. So he continues to be one of my inspirations, but certainly was someone who made me think about why it was important to think about learners' choices and encourage them to be autonomous. And if you are autonomous, even in a small way, I guess it means that you're going to be choosing meaningful learning tasks for yourself. So these other two gentlemen, again, I don't know whether you recognize them. They seem very happy in this picture. So these are Richard Ryan and Edward Deasy, and they're motivation theory researchers. They came up with the idea of, the theory of self-determination to explain motivation. And I guess the reason why I'm interested in this, or became interested in this, is because they also talk about the importance of autonomy. So autonomy and motivation, as we know, go hand in hand. So when you feel autonomous and you have some freedom of choice, then you will be engaged and psychologically ready to learn. And then they also emphasize that it's important that you feel competent. That means that you're not too overwhelmed. So the task is not too difficult, but also not too easy. And finally, that you feel connected to your group, to your teacher. So there's a learning community around you. And this will become important as I go along, hopefully, with new links to develop this idea. Another source of inspiration for me was the literature on 21st century approaches. Actually, quite recently in a conference, somebody said we shouldn't talk about 21st century approaches anymore because we're a quarter of the way through the 21st century. So we should be talking about current approaches. But in any case, I'm sure many of you have heard about 21st century approaches to learning, and the fact that it's lifelong learning and it emphasizes key skills such as critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and communication. These are probably well known and widely discussed. But again, for me, the idea of having to focus on learning to learn links very well with autonomy and motivation. In other words, learners cannot just be left alone, but need to be trained in becoming autonomous learners who know how to kind of go about learning. And another important thing here is the blurring of the traditional subject areas. So rather than dividing the curriculum into half an hour geography, followed by half an hour maths and half an hour history, 21st century approaches will focus on project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, taking a problem of interest that's meaningful and then working around it and using skills that touch upon perhaps various different subject areas. Because that way, I guess people in this particular approach argue that it's much more meaningful and memorable. Going on, another very important inspiration for me has been familiarization with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. This is a very old document, has been around more than 30 years. But I guess it's a document that when you read it and when you engage with it deeply, you realize how important it is. Many of the countries around the world accepted this and tried to incorporate it into their curricula. The problem is that usually it's incorporated in a very superficial manner. And the other issue is, of course, that not everybody supports this and not everybody agrees with it. There are 54 articles in the document, and some of them are not accepted in all cultures and in all parts of the world. I'm not going to discuss and go into the details of the controversies, but the main message, I guess, is very uncontroversial, is that children do have the right to be listened to and for their opinion to be taken seriously, and that they have got rights, just like adults have rights as well. Another inspiration comes from the childhood studies tradition, again, very, very old now, but this perspective on children is quite fresh in the sense that scholars in this particular tradition criticized the traditional approaches and suggested that we need to also look at children not just as passive and vulnerable objects, but also potentially as active, capable subjects. And so the idea is not one is true, the other is false. The idea is that both are possible angles, and the second one, the active, capable angle, hasn't really been looked at until these scholars came along. They suggested that children are experts of their own lives, and so therefore, if we think that their perspectives are important, they need to be understood and they need to be also taken seriously. What this means is that it's not just enough to ask children about what they think and then ignore what they say, but it's really important to engage with what they say, because otherwise the children themselves will notice very quickly that you're just asking, but you're not actually seriously interested. And as a result of this kind of approach to studying children, many people took an interest in working with children as co-researchers and even researchers in their own right. And again, I discovered quite a few years ago now, but certainly not 30 years ago when this was new, I discovered that there's a very rich and interesting literature out there in other areas, not in applied linguistics or language education, about working with children as co-researchers and researchers. And one book in particular was transformational in my development and in my understanding, and this is Mary Callett's book from the Open University in the UK. She was a scholar there before she retired, and this book she wrote about developing children as researchers. It's a step-by-step guide, and this is something that I personally used in my own work, but also something that I know is very, very popular with teachers and educators who are interested in this way of working in classrooms. So I very much recommend this book, but also flagging it up as a major influence in my thinking. So the next major influence is, of course, the literature on critical pedagogies and democratic education. Critical pedagogies, will very much change the relationship and the dynamic in classrooms. Everybody's voice matters, and relationships need to become much more horizontal rather than hierarchical. And very importantly, there's a focus on learners' identity and authentic needs. So, for example, if a textbook suggests ideas and content that seem to be totally unsuitable for the learners, then a teacher who works with this approach would change the textbook and suggest new ideas, new content that the learners can actually engage with and be interested in. So it's an approach that's respectful to the learners, but also puts the emphasis on meaningful learning content. And of course, questioning everything. The idea that we need to question the status quo is key to critical pedagogies. Another inspiration is the very interesting development of maker spaces, and I know these are very popular in the USA and elsewhere, and they can be pop-up workshop and spaces, or some schools can invest in these. Maker spaces were originally designed for teaching technology and STEM subjects, and it's very much focused on problem solving and project-based learning. There's a problem and a group of us get together and try and solve it. But it has also been used in other areas, so not just in STEM and technology. There have been studies with this idea of creating maker spaces for social research, but also for humanities and language classes. The main idea that's attractive to me and that links very well with my other inspirations is that knowledge and expertise here is co-constructed. So there are horizontal relationships. Everyone can come along and help. Indigenous and creative approaches and tools are also welcome. So to try something and see if it works, or to develop an idea further just spontaneously, just because an idea comes to the group, is very much encouraged. So the tinkering and the experimentation of maker spaces is something that I think fits really well with the 21st century approaches, with the meaningfulness of learning, with the fact that we work together and co-construct in horizontal groups together where ideas are shared. And actually in some maker spaces you can have children of different ages, siblings, even parents, and these kind of very multi-talented groups often create the best work. And finally, but certainly almost most importantly, as many of you who are interested in early years and young learners, as I know this whole group is all about multilingual young learners, early years alternative education is also a huge inspiration to me, and was inspiration to me, because people like Peter Moss and his colleagues have been working on the idea that teaching and researching should be the same processes. Teachers should become researchers, and teachers should always take their inspiration and their cues from the children. So learning should be open-ended and non-linear, and listening to the children's ideas should be what guides the curriculum, which therefore needs to be emergent and open-ended. So this is a stark contrast to the kind of curricula that we have in preschools or schools in many contexts. Teaching and learning should be, as I said, one and the same process, and they look at classrooms as research laboratories, which means that anytime you teach something, basically you're also looking into processes of research. However, one very important thing here is the systematic documentation of what goes on, of the learning process. And that systematic documentation is something that you can then reflect on, and that gives you a really good a basis for developing your ideas about which direction you want to take your research interest. But rather than a linear learning path, the really attractive thing here is, again, individual interest and emergent learning opportunities based on where the children are coming from. So how to bring all this together? So I came up with this structure of dividing research into research on and about children as opposed to with and by children. And so basically I devoted the book to exploring how these ideas come together to support the latter two, so possibilities for classrooms where teachers work with children as co-researchers or encourage research done by children. A very important caveat in the book that I repeated several times is, of course, I'm not against research on children or research about children. I very much acknowledge that those are extremely important and important for them to carry on. The idea is really just to put the emphasis with the latter two and encourage where possible and where people are interested to explore how an alternative approach to research in classrooms might be possible. So in order to do this, I also needed to come up with definitions for research, what's research, and also who is a child, because when you look at the literature, often children are not defined at all, and various different age brackets are included depending on what you read and where you go for your definitions. So for research, I like to show these very simple, what I call continuum from small letter research to capital letter research. So the idea that research is something that we can do at different levels. And for example, in universities, we do a certain type of academic research, which in order for it to be published in peer-reviewed academic journals, it needs to be extremely rigorous, it needs to be innovative, it needs to bring something new, and it needs to have very precisely written up methodological sections, for example. Whereas research that teachers do or learners do obviously sits lower down on the continuum. But in my view, it is a process where someone who is currently at the lower end of the continuum, if they have the interest, the opportunity, and the desire, they can move forward on the continuum and they can become more formally trained. They can understand more about research. They don't necessarily wish to, but if they do, they can travel upwards on this continuum. And with the bugs here, I guess I'm also perhaps suggesting that there is a transformation as well. You might reach a stage where you think you have become more established as a researcher. Another way of looking at it is the opportunity that is there in everyone, but only if you get water and you get necessary sunlight. So children in schools where research is never encouraged and never cultivated and is never given as an option, this might not happen, whereas in other schools with other teachers, this may well happen. And yes, you're only a small, tiny plant compared to a big tree that is your teacher. But again, the continuum idea, I think, is very, very clear. So now I'm just going to very briefly talk about two possibilities. Research with preschoolers or children who can't read and write yet. What kind of opportunities are there out there that I understand? And of course, in my book, I talk a lot about existing research, ideas from different areas such as environmental education, social work, health related subject areas. So there are lots and lots of other examples to pick up. But for example, inspired by the mosaic approach, Clark and Moss, and I'm sure some of you have heard about this or even very familiar with this. And originally, Clark and Moss were inspired by the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education in Italy. It would be lovely to go into a lot more detail about this, but please do read about it if you're not familiar, because it's a really inspiring approach to early childhood education. But here's a very simple idea. So it might be that you're interested to understand what the children like about English learning in a preschool environment. So rather than kind of interviewing them or getting them to write something because I can't write yet, two very commonly used approaches would be getting them to take photos or draw pictures of their favorite activities. So you could limit this to 2-3 drawings or photos each, or you could get so many drawings and photos from each group. And you could kind of also let them take lots of photos and then later on ask them to select some that they think are most important. So there are many, many opportunities here. But basically then the children would talk about their photos and drawings, and you would have to somehow record that because their commentaries about the photos and the drawings would be really important basis for starting to look into what it is that they enjoy and why. You could get the children to count or summarize or interpret the results, like, for example, by making a very simple exhibition of the photos or the drawings on the wall and keep the visual up there and encourage opportunities for discussion, asking questions, making comments. And I think this shouldn't be rushed. This should take as long as it takes. Sometimes children would want to comment on an individual basis or in groups or together with the teacher, or the teacher might like to ask questions. or just let the children to come up with their spontaneous comments. The teacher should also reflect on this. What do the drawings and the photos tell me? What do the photos tell the parents? So parents could be involved and included and invited to come and have a look. The idea is that there needs to be some kind of documentation, as I mentioned before, and this is achieved by displaying the children's work for some kind of further reflection and dialogue. And again, these could be recorded, audio recorded, video recorded. That really depends on the situation. Now, what languages are used? Well, typically for younger children, if they're multilingual or bilingual or trilingual, you would encourage the use of all the languages. If it's a strictly English class and you want to put emphasis on English, you could then encourage the use of English, but only up to a point. So children probably wouldn't be able to comment on their drawings and photos in English. They may be able to give a short description in English, and there you have your language objective for your lesson. So the kind of tinkering with the different languages and allowing and inviting the different languages is very much part of this. Now, of course, when you do this kind of work with preschool children, the classroom teacher is by far the best placed person as the researcher, not an outsider. Because an outsider, it would take much longer to settle into the classroom, to get to know the children, because the relationship and the trust is very important here. The documentation of the children's output, as I said before, is something that needs to be done really thoroughly, and it will take probably, difficult to say in advance how long it will take, but it will probably take much longer than just, 1 or 2 lessons. And if possible, it's advisable to capture the children's contributions in context over time. So sometimes we refer this to getting children's thick voices, meaning just because somebody one day makes a throwaway comment, it will be very difficult to interpret that in isolation. But when children make similar comments over time, or they make comments where you notice some kind of development, or group members build on each other's comments, things like that, then you can begin to have data that presents you with thick voices in a particular context that is much easier to interpret than just kind of individual voices in the vacuum. Now, it's important also to think about going beyond the romantic and uncritical stance to agency. And by this I mean, these children said something really quite clever. It was 2-3 sentences, and now we interpret it as they have a deep understanding of a particular phenomenon. Well, it's unlikely. It's probably more likely that they heard those phrases from an adult, or they heard those phrases at home or on the whatever media they've been exposed to. So it is really important not to just interpret children's what children say verbatim, but to actually think about the context and think about the adult-child co-construction of the discourse, think about the influences of the institution and of even the setup and the material objects around the children. So in addition to using photos and drawings, a range of alternative approaches are possible. And again, in the book, I give loads and loads of examples for these, and loads of interesting and successful studies where researchers or teachers have successfully engaged children beyond just using these 2 most frequently used approaches. And then finally, there'd be a lot more to say, but it is really important to mention that it is really important to pay acute attention to silence, possible discomfort, or lost interest. So children who are involved in this kind of work might suddenly lose interest, or might suddenly decide they don't want to do this anymore, or they keep silent. And as we know, silence has got lots and lots of possible meanings. So the teacher researcher working with very young children has to have a particularly acute ethical stance in terms of trying to read the children and read their willingness, continued willingness to participate in these projects. Okay, so moving on, I have to say that I haven't actually done work with preschool children myself. I've seen a lot of good work written up, but my work has been with primary school learners. And in this short section, I will give you a quick taste of research I did in a local primary school. And I know Samana is in the audience, and she was actually somebody who helped me with the implementation phase of this project. So she will also be able, hopefully, to comment and answer questions about this. So just very, very briefly, this is an example with older children who can already read and write. These were 9-year-olds in a local primary school. So I talked about this quite a lot before, so I'm sorry if this is very familiar to some people, but I will just quickly go through it for the sake of those who haven't seen it or heard it. So because I was really interested in trying to see how this would work with a group of real children just down the road near my university in a local school. So what I did was I asked the local school's head teacher to give me permission to do this. And it was like an 8-week, I called it research club, every Friday afternoon with year 5 children in the UK who are 9 years old. And this is the lower limit. So if you look at Mary Kellett's work in the research training children to become researchers in the book that I earlier recommended, she would say that this age group is probably the youngest that you can do the sorts of activities that she recommends in that book. So I was really interested to see whether it would work and how it would work. And usually one criticism of research is that always children who are very, very communicative and who are high achievers and popular, those are the children who tend to be chosen for co-researcher projects or researcher projects. So again, I've decided I don't want that. I would like a really mixed group of children. And so I ended up with 8 children. Half of those children, 4 of them were non-English speaking children who recently arrived in the school. And one of them had serious learning difficulties, and the others were just children whose parents were helpful enough to agree to the study, basically. So it was a very non-select group in the sense none of them were high achievers at all. So I started by teaching them some research terminology, and then we practiced these through various games. So Mary Kellett in the book suggests not to turn this into something simplified, but teach them terminology as if you're teaching adults. So I taught them things like research questions, ethics. I taught them things like what is bias, what is Likert scale question in a questionnaire, for example. So it was quite a quite a serious undertaking, but through the games we practiced, they seemed to lap it up, and there was absolutely no problem whatsoever engaging with these terms. I also inspired them with some child research from the internet, I forgot to say, and at the beginning we had discussions about what research was and what they understood about it. Okay, I have to go much faster because time is ticking. So then they experienced filling in a questionnaire, because I was aware that some of them never seen a questionnaire before, and if I wanted to work on questionnaires, which I did, then that was very important. Then they designed their own questionnaire, which we distributed in the school, so it was either for other children or for teachers. They could choose their own research questions and their own topics. Then in the sessions, we analyzed the data, and they also completed presentations using computers and MP4 now, but at the time it was MP3 players or iPads. So here's just an example of a research question of two boys. The question was about, do people in year 3 and 6 would rather play video games or real games? We chose this question because games are, it's not finished, but they were very into video games. That's why they chose it. So here is Summoner's questionnaire, which was an inspiration for the children and also a learning tool. This is the questionnaire they all filled in to learn about what a questionnaire looked like and what it was and what kind of questions you can expect in your questionnaire. You can see that some of these questions are quite you know, there are some yes and no questions. There are some questions where you have to tick the answer, and then there are some Likert scale questions. There's also a lovely introduction here on the first page from Summoner, and also at the very end there is a thank you note, and there's some friendly emojis and pictures. So like I said, this served as a learning tool, but it also served as a bit of a model for them. So here's a typical questionnaire that a child would have created. So you recognize the introduction, the emoji, and the types of questions that they constructed. The 8 children, some of them worked in pairs and some of them wanted to work individually. We didn't have to worry about who's going to do what. They all organized themselves very efficiently into pairs or individuals. And this is the kind of data analysis they did, because mostly the examples that I showed them from the Open University Child Research Center, the example I showed them, many of those children did the same thing. So they created pie charts and bar charts with their findings. Just to bring your attention to the fact that the green one is the 2 boys who are interested in real games or computer games. So just notice that their bar charts are actually quite sophisticated. They're looking at 2 classes, they're looking at both girls and boys, and so they were working quite hard, and some of them got 60 questionnaires back, which is, you know, you probably wouldn't want more than that in a master's dissertation, at least in the UK, where you only have like 3 months to complete your dissertation. So this was something that they all wanted to do, even though I think it's torturous to create these in Word, it is really not something that I would have ever thought they would take an interest in. But they did, and this was kind of one of their favorite things. You can see in the photos how the pairs work together, and you can see another example of questionnaire. And just very, very briefly, a snapshot of what the children said. So at the end, I talked to them about the whole experience, and I've just picked out some of the most revealing comments. I expected for you to do it all because I thought we tell you the ideas and then you write it all very complicated. That's what I thought. So again, this idea that, yes, I told them at the beginning they were all going to do their own research, but even then they all thought that eventually I will do it all because surely they can't do it and they would never be trusted to do it. At the beginning, I thought I didn't like this because I'm not very good at English, but actually I did it with a friend. So we did it okay, and it was not hard, and I really liked it. So again, this kind of horizontal working, doing it together, it really is something that helped a lot of them to cope with this extremely well. We learned a lot of things like ethics, data collection, pie charts, research questions, interviews, and this is what we're having now. So again, their ability to kind of come out with the terminology for research was absolutely astonishing, and they were really enjoying using the concepts and the terms. We were very excited when we got them, the questionnaire data, when they got the questionnaire data back. That's, I think, when they finally understood what it meant for them to do their own research, because up until then it was still a fairly vague concept. And I often say this when I talk about this, that compare this with the idea of open your book on page 25, where Peter, our hero in the book, has got, questionnaires back from somebody or his class, and he's looking at the results. It's not that meaningful because it's not yours. I think what was really important here is that the children felt that they asked the questions, and then the teachers or other children in other classrooms bothered to answer. And this is the real stuff, the real responses they got. We very much enjoyed the computer work. The best thing was that you let us go on the computer and we could write our own questionnaire. So this is again screaming autonomy and agency and the idea that we want to go on that computer and do our own thing. Only just please let us. Really enjoyed the bar charts, the feeling when we finally finish the bar chart, it comes up and there's a massive explosion, and that's the best. Of course, it's a bit exaggerated. There's no massive explosion. It's just that when you enter the numbers, suddenly the bar chart appears at one click. And like I said, I would have always thought that wasn't exactly an exciting thing, but everyone here seemed to think. So again, we as adults seem to often misjudge what might be exciting and motivating to people. We're very much proud because we did it most of it alone, and I'd like to do some more. And yes, I'd like to do it again times 20 million. And this is a really good example for, obviously, the times 20 million, if we just kind of analyze that on its own, it's nonsense, isn't it? It's somebody speaking to you because they want to sound positive, and they want to tell you what you want to hear, which is that they enjoyed themselves. But when you hear it again and again, when you hear it expressed in different ways, and when you see them fully engaged in it, and when you see how much excited they get about the final product being displayed or put on the website, that's when you get a better idea that they really did enjoy it. And towards the end of the project, all of them had new ideas for what to do next. All of them were saying, oh, I know now what I want to do for my next questionnaire, and I want to do bigger and better. And of course, it's important not to forget to also, if the findings are about something that's meaningful to them, then you need to also take action. So, for example, going back to my previous example, if the children tell you they really don't like something in the English class, then it's wrong to say, oh, well, we found that none of you like this, so therefore we just continue to do it. So sometimes taking action is a very important final point. And depending on what the action is and what the topic is, you know, it can be very, very important to do that. And this is where this kind of work links really well with, you know, more important research in the community, for example, where activism is important. Getting children involved in positive activism is potentially a stepping stone from here. So this research project, or this little project, is published in this book, Participatory Research with Young Children, and I'd like to recommend Angela Eckhoff. Actually, she's based in the US, in Virginia, in Old Dominion University, and she's an early years expert, not a linguist, but an early years expert, and has done some pretty amazing work with her colleagues. So maybe one day you guys might like to invite her. I don't have time for this, but if you were to be interested, there's also interesting examples for older students or for secondary level students, depending on their appetite and willingness to engage with research. Of course, you can go much deeper. You can really polish, for example, their interview skills. You can go to YouTube. You can really work on things like peer interviewing, for example, and even encourage them to you know, train to become more effective interviewers. So in a handbook which came out as one of the outcomes from our British Council India project, and I've noticed some people are here in the audience from that project, so thank you guys for following this, and thank you for your interest. So this is a freely available and downloadable book which has got loads of examples of children and older learners as well. And here's one particular example where you can work with learners. This is based on a teacher's work in our research project. So I will leave this in here, and those of you who want to come back to it and look it up or want to find more examples, you will find both in this book and of course in the Cambridge book that this talk is about. There'll be examples for all the learners. So I'm going to stop now because there's barely enough time for questions. So some interesting dilemmas arise, of course. Is children research really research? This is a question that I get a lot. How to interpret children's voices, and how can we promote more critical approaches rather than just accept verbatim what an individual child says. Listening to children's voices is important, but what if we don't like what they say? What if we're shocked or upset or surprised what they say? Interesting dilemmas exist between the need to protect children and the need to give them space, agency, autonomy, and take initiatives. So this is interesting. And finally, there are a few references here, and I'll stop here because I'm very aware that I've gone well over my time. So thank you so much for the interest. And I'm going to stop sharing now so that I can see the comments and questions and potentially the faces as well.